She woke up before sunrise as she always did, when the city was still quiet and the streets felt honest. The small room she lived in had plain walls, a narrow bed, and a window that looked out onto an old building across the lane. Nothing in that room suggested anything special. There were no awards, no framed photos, no signs of a remarkable past. Just a kettle, a chair, and a few folded clothes kept neat out of habit, not pride. She moved carefully through her morning routine, trying not to make noise, even though no one else was there. Years of living quietly had trained her to take up as little space as possible. She believed that if she stayed unnoticed, life would remain simple and manageable. Attention, in her experience, always came with a cost. After a quick breakfast, she wrapped a plain shawl around herself and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, and she paused for a moment to breathe deeply. For a few seconds, her fingers moved slightly, tapping against each other, almost like they were counting invisible beats. She stopped herself quickly, slipped her hands into her pockets, and continued walking. She worked at a private school, a place filled with rules, routines, and quiet pressure. Her role was modest. She helped where needed, cleaned rooms, carried supplies, and followed instructions without complaint. Most people barely noticed her unless something was missing or out of place. To them, she was part of the background, like the walls or the floors. The teachers knew her only by her work. They saw someone dependable, quiet, and simple. She never argued, never tried to stand out, and never spoke unless spoken to. When conversations happened around her, she listened but did not join in. It was not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned long ago that silence kept her safe. What no one knew was that silence had not always been her world. As she cleaned a classroom that morning, her eyes briefly rested on a piano in the corner of the music room across the hall. The door was open, and sunlight fell across the keys. For a moment, she froze. The smell of polished wood, the shape of the instrument, the way the light touched it. It all felt too familiar. Her chest tightened, and she looked away quickly, as if the piano had caught her doing something wrong. She picked up her broom and continued working, her movements slower now. Inside her mind, memories stirred, soft but persistent. There was a time when her days had started and ended with music. A time when her hands were strong and confident, when she knew every key by feel, even with her eyes closed. But those days belonged to another life, one she had carefully folded away. At the school, music was important. The teachers took pride in performances and competitions. Students practiced daily, and parents often gathered for recitals. Talent was praised loudly, displayed proudly. For her, that world felt distant, almost unreal. She stayed far from it, choosing tasks that kept her invisible. During breaks, she sat alone, usually outside or in a quiet corner. She watched students laugh, argue, and dream out loud about their futures. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she felt a quiet ache. Not regret exactly, but something close. She reminded herself that she had made her choices for a reason. The teachers often spoke without noticing her presence. They complained about schedules, events, and students who did not practice enough. Once, while passing by the staff room, she heard raised voices about an upcoming school program. The music teacher sounded stressed. There were not enough skilled students ready to perform. Time was running out. She slowed her steps but did not stop. She had learned not to linger where she did not belong. As days passed, the school grew busier. Posters went up, rehearsals became longer, and tension filled the air. She felt it even without being told. The pressure reminded her of another time, long ago, when expectations had weighed heavily on her shoulders. She pushed the thought away. One afternoon, while cleaning the music room, she noticed fingerprints on the piano keys. Without thinking, she reached for a cloth and wiped them gently. Her movements were careful, respectful. She knew exactly how much pressure to use. Her hands moved with a familiarity that surprised even her. When she finished, she stood there for a moment, staring at the keys. Her fingers hovered above them. She pulled her hands back quickly, her heart beating faster than it should. She shook her head slightly, as if scolding herself. This was not her place anymore. She reminded herself of the promises she had made to live quietly, to stay unnoticed. Life had taught her hard lessons. Talent did not always protect you. Sometimes it attracted expectations that left no room for rest, no space to breathe. Sometimes it came with judgments, comparisons, and demands that slowly took away joy. Walking away had been painful but necessary. At least that was what she told herself. As the day ended, she left the school with tired feet and a calm face. No one stopped her, no one asked her about her thoughts. That was how she preferred it. On her walk home, the sounds of the city blended into a soft rhythm. Car horns, distant laughter, footsteps. Her mind turned them into patterns without effort. She caught herself again and sighed quietly. At home, she cooked a simple meal and ate slowly. Afterward, she sat by the window watching the sky darken. Somewhere nearby, someone was practicing music. The sound was uneven, filled with mistakes. She listened carefully, her head tilted slightly, her fingers moving again on her lap, correcting notes only she could hear. She closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to remember the feeling of being fully present, fully alive, with music flowing through her instead of around her. Then she opened her eyes and stood up. She washed her dishes, folded her clothes, and prepared for sleep. Before lying down, she placed her hands flat on the bed and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be another quiet day, another day of being unseen. That was the plan. What she did not know was that the silence she had built around herself was about to break. Not by her choice, but by the hands of others who believed they understood her place in the world. And when that moment came, the truth she had hidden so carefully would begin to surface, one note at a time. The next morning, the school felt different. The usual calm had been replaced by urgency. Voices carried farther down the hallways, footsteps were faster, and doors opened and closed more often than usual. Everyone seemed to be rushing toward something, though no one said it clearly. She noticed it as soon as she arrived. Teachers stood in small groups, speaking in low, tense tones. Papers were passed around. Someone sighed loudly. She kept her eyes down and went about her work, moving chairs back into place and wiping desks that were already clean. Staying busy helped her avoid questions. As she worked, she heard fragments of conversation. The school program was closer than anyone expected. One of the main piano performers had fallen sick. Another student was not ready. Practice hours had been wasted, and patience was running thin. The music room had become the center of the problem. She tried to ignore it, but the sound of the piano echoed through the hall more often now. Short, sharp notes, mistakes, stops and starts. Each wrong note made her shoulders tighten. She did not want to listen, yet her ears caught everything. It was like trying not to notice your own breathing. During the afternoon, she was asked to clean the music room again. This was unusual. Normally, she went in only once a day. She nodded and went without question, carrying her cloth and broom. Inside, the air felt heavy. The piano lid was open. Sheets of music were scattered across the bench. A teacher stood nearby, rubbing their forehead, clearly frustrated. Another teacher entered, shaking their head. She kept to the far side of the room, wiping shelves slowly. She could feel eyes on her, though she did not look up. She told herself to finish quickly and leave. Then someone spoke to her. The voice was firm, impatient, not unkind but sharp from stress. She was asked if she could stay for a moment. She stopped what she was doing and turned slightly, her hands still holding the cloth. She nodded. They explained the situation in quick words. The program needed anyone, to play a simple piece. Just something basic. Nothing special. It was only to fill time. The way it was said made it clear they did not expect much. She felt her heart drop. She shook her head gently and tried to refuse. She said she was not the right person. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the room. She added that she had work to finish. The refusal was not taken seriously. One of the teachers laughed lightly, not in a cruel way, but in a dismissive one. They said she did not need to be nervous. It was only a few notes. Anyone could try. Another teacher added that it would help everyone if she cooperated. She stood there, trapped between politeness and panic. Saying no again felt impossible. Years of taking orders had trained her to agree before conflict grew. She looked down at the floor, her fingers tightening around the cloth. They gestured toward the piano. Her feet felt heavy as she took a step forward. Every part of her wanted to turn around and leave the room. Memories flooded her mind. Bright lights, quiet audiences, expectations that felt too big to carry. She swallowed hard. She tried once more to explain. She said she did not play anymore, that it had been a long time. Her words came out uneven. The response was short. She was told to just try. If it was bad, they would stop her. That sentence stayed with her. If it was bad. She reached the bench slowly and sat down. The piano felt colder than she expected. The keys looked the same, yet different, like old friends you no longer recognize right away. She placed her hands on her lap, not ready to touch them. Around her, people waited. Some looked curious. Some looked bored. None of them expected anything worth remembering. She stared at the keys. Her reflection stared back faintly from the polished surface. She saw someone older, quieter, carrying weight no one else could see. Her fingers hovered above the piano. She hesitated. One of the teachers cleared their throat, clearly losing patience. The sound broke the silence like a snap. Her fingers touched the keys. She pressed one key. Just one. The sound filled the room, simple and clean. She pressed another. Then another. The notes were slow, careful, almost shy. She was not playing music yet. She was testing herself, checking if her hands still remembered what her mind never forgot. The teachers exchanged looks. This was not impressive. It was exactly what they expected. But inside her something shifted. Her hands relaxed slightly. The tension in her shoulders eased. The piano responded the way it always had, faithfully. She felt the familiar resistance of the keys, the balance between pressure and release. It felt like speaking a language she had never truly forgotten. She stopped. The room was quiet again. She looked up, ready to apologize, ready to stand and return to her work. But before she could move, she was told to continue. Just a little more. The tone was different now. Less mocking. More curious. She nodded slowly. This time, when she began to play, the notes connected. The rhythm formed naturally. She kept it simple as she had been told. No fast runs. No dramatic changes. Just a gentle flow. The room changed. People who had been distracted looked up. Conversations stopped. Someone at the door leaned in without realizing it. The sound was not loud, but it carried something deeper. Control. Feeling. Confidence hidden under softness. She focused on the keys, not the people. She played as if no one was listening, as if she were alone in her small room at night, letting music exist without judgment. When she finished, she lifted her hands and waited. No one spoke right away. The silence felt different now. Not uncomfortable, thoughtful. A teacher finally said something, asking how long she had practiced. The question caught her off guard. She answered honestly but vaguely. A long time ago. Not anymore. There were more questions forming. But the moment was interrupted by another teacher entering the room with urgent news. Rehearsal was rescheduled. Decisions had to be made quickly. She was told she could go. She stood up, her legs weak, and returned to her cleaning supplies. No one stopped her this time, but she could feel eyes following her as she left the room. That evening, as she walked home, her thoughts raced. She had broken her own rule. She had been seen. At home, she tried to calm herself, telling herself it meant nothing. It was only a few minutes, only a simple tune. Yet deep down, she knew something had changed. The silence she had built was cracking. And tomorrow, the school would not forget what it had heard. The next day, she arrived at the school earlier than usual. Not because she wanted to, but because sleep had not come easily. Her mind kept replaying the sound of the piano, the way the room had gone quiet, the looks she felt on her back as she walked away. She told herself it was nothing, yet her body did not believe her. The school gates opened, and she stepped inside, hoping the morning routine would swallow the memory whole. But the moment she entered, she sensed it again. A shift, a quiet awareness. People noticed her now, even if they did not know why. As she passed through the hallway, a teacher glanced at her and paused, as if trying to remember something important. Another teacher whispered to someone nearby, eyes following her for a brief second. No one said her name. No one stopped her. But the air felt different, heavier, watchful. She kept her head down and went to work. While cleaning a classroom, she heard footsteps approach. Someone stood at the doorway longer than necessary. She did not look up right away. When she finally did, she was asked if she could help in the music room again later that day. The voice was polite this time, careful. Her chest tightened. She nodded slowly, though every part of her wanted to say no. She told herself it would only be cleaning. Nothing more. By midday, the school buzzed with nervous energy. Rehearsals had been moved, schedules changed. Students were being pulled from classes. The program was no longer just an event. It had become a problem that needed solving. When she entered the music room again, she noticed the chairs had been rearranged. The piano bench was centered. More sheet music lay open. This was not for cleaning. She stood still near the door. A teacher approached and asked her to sit. Not ordered this time. Asked. The difference unsettled her more than force ever could. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the piano. She said she was not a performer. She reminded them that she had only played something small, something simple. Her words were calm, but her hands shook slightly. The response was gentle but firm. They said they needed help. They said what she played yesterday did not sound like luck. It sounded trained. That word hit her harder than expected. Trained. For a moment she considered walking out, leaving the room, leaving the school, but her feet stayed where they were. She had run once already in her life. She did not know if she had the strength to do it again. She sat down. This time there were more people in the room. A few teachers. A few older students passing by who stopped at the doorway. The attention pressed in on her from all sides. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she placed her hands on the keys. She did not start right away. Silence stretched. Someone shifted in their seat. She breathed slowly, reminding herself she was safe, that no one here knew her past, that she owed them nothing more than honesty. She began to play. The piece was still simple, but there was more shape to it now. The notes rose and fell naturally. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence, guided by memory rather than effort. She did not rush. She let the music breathe. The room listened. As the minutes passed, the change became impossible to ignore. This was not a beginner. This was not someone guessing. This was someone who understood music deeply. Someone who knew when to pause, when to soften, when to let a note linger just a little longer. A teacher at the back of the room leaned forward, eyes wide. Another lowered their arms slowly, as if afraid to break the moment. Even the hallway outside grew quiet. She finished and lifted her hands. No one clapped. Not because they were unimpressed, but because the moment felt too fragile to touch. Someone finally spoke, asking where she had learned to play like that. She took a long breath. She did not share details. She did not speak of stages or years of training. She only said she learned long ago, and life had taken her in a different direction. There was silence again, filled this time with understanding. The teachers exchanged looks. Plans shifted in those glances. She could feel it happening around her, decisions being made without her voice. She was asked if she could help with the program. Just this once. Just to save the day. The request felt heavy. She thought of the quiet life she had built. The safety of being unseen. She also thought of the way the music had filled the room, honest and alive, asking nothing in return. She said she would think about it. That afternoon, she returned to her usual duties. But her mind was far away. Students looked at her differently now. Some smiled politely. Others whispered. Rumors began quietly, spreading without names, without facts. She avoided the music room for the rest of the day. When she left the school, the sun was already low. She walked slowly, letting the cool air settle her thoughts. She wondered how long she could keep pretending she was someone else. How long she could hide a part of herself that refused to stay silent. At home, she sat in the dark for a long time, not turning on the lights. Her hands rested on her knees, fingers moving slightly, tracing patterns only she understood. She remembered the first time she had touched a piano, how the sound had felt like truth. She remembered the pressure, the praise, the weight of expectation that followed. How music had stopped being a refuge and become a demand. Walking away had saved her then, but now the music had found her again. She stood up and turned on the light. She looked at her hands, worn from years of work, still strong, still capable. She did not know what she would decide tomorrow. All she knew was that the simple life she had chosen was slipping away. And once people truly see you, it is impossible to become invisible again. The following morning, she walked into the school with a strange mix of calm and fear. Calm, because a decision had been forming quietly inside her all night. Fear, because once spoken, it could not be taken back. The hallways looked the same, but to her, everything felt exposed, like a room with no curtains. She began her work as usual, but it was clear she was no longer invisible. Teachers greeted her more directly. Some smiled in a way that felt uncertain, as if they were still adjusting their understanding of who she might be. Students glanced at her with curiosity, trying to connect the quiet worker they knew with the sound they had heard. Before midday, she was asked to come to the music room again. This time, she did not hesitate. When she entered, the room was already prepared. Chairs were lined neatly. The piano stood polished and open, waiting. Several teachers were present, their expressions serious but hopeful. She noticed a sense of respect in the way they spoke to her now. It made her uncomfortable. She told them she would help with the program. The relief in the room was immediate. Shoulders relaxed. Someone let out a quiet breath they had been holding. She raised her hand gently and added a condition. She did not want announcements, introductions, or attention beyond what was necessary. She wanted the focus to remain on the music, not on her story. They agreed quickly. Practice began that afternoon. At first, she kept her distance, choosing simple pieces, nothing dramatic. She wanted control. She wanted safety. But as the days passed, the music naturally grew fuller. Her hands remembered more than she expected. Her confidence returned slowly, like a tide that does not rush but cannot be stopped. The teachers watched closely. They spoke less now, listening more. They adjusted plans around her instead of pushing her to fit theirs. It was a quiet shift, but an important one. Students began to sit outside the music room during rehearsals, pretending to wait for something else. Word had spread, though no one said it openly. There was something special happening behind that door. She noticed the attention, but she did not let it change her. She arrived, played, corrected small mistakes, and left. She did not stay to talk. She did not explain herself. Music was enough. As the program day approached, tension returned, but this time it was mixed with excitement. The missing performer was no longer a problem. Instead, the challenge became doing justice to what they now had. The night before the event, she barely slept. She lay awake listening to the quiet sounds of the city, her thoughts steady but deep. She was not afraid of playing. She was afraid of what might come after. She reminded herself that this was temporary. One performance, one moment, then life would return to normal. The day of the program arrived. The school was filled with noise, decorations, and nervous energy. Parents arrived early. Students wore their best clothes. Teachers moved quickly, checking lists and whispering reminders. She stayed in a small room near the stage, away from the crowd. There was no mirror, no spotlight, just a chair and a quiet space to breathe. She sat with her hands folded, grounding herself. When it was time, someone came to get her. She walked toward the stage slowly, not looking at the audience. The lights were bright but not blinding. The piano waited at the center, familiar and steady. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The room grew quiet. She began to play. From the first note, the difference was clear. This was not practice. This was not filling time. The music carried emotion, depth, and honesty. Each note felt deliberate, shaped by years of experience and quiet understanding. People leaned forward without realizing it. Some held their breath. The sound filled the room gently, wrapping around the audience instead of overwhelming them. She did not look up. She let the music speak. As the piece unfolded, the audience forgot about the program schedule, the school, and even themselves. The music felt personal, as if it were being played for each person alone. When the final note faded, silence followed. Then applause rose, slow at first, then stronger. It was not loud or wild. It was deep, sincere, filled with respect. She stood briefly, bowed her head, and stepped away. Backstage, the teachers were emotional. Some tried to speak but could not find the right words. She thanked them quietly and returned to her small room, changing back into her simple clothes. The program continued, but the energy had changed. Everyone felt it. After the event, people wanted to meet her, to ask questions, to understand. She slipped away before that could happen, leaving quietly through a side exit. On her walk home, the night air felt cool and clean. She felt lighter than she had in years. Not because she had been praised, but because she had been honest. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing clearly. She had stopped running from herself. The morning after the program, the school felt unusually quiet. Not empty, but calm in a way that only comes after something meaningful has passed. She arrived at her usual time, dressed the same as always, carrying the same cloth and small bag. From the outside, nothing about her had changed. Inside, everything had. As she walked through the gate, a few people paused. Some smiled. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked unsure of how to speak to her now. She felt the shift immediately. The space around her felt different, as if people were stepping aside without realizing it. She did not like that feeling. She went straight to work, focusing on the familiar routine. Cleaning, arranging, wiping. The simple tasks helped ground her. They reminded her who she was beyond the music. Before long, she was asked to come to the office. Her heart sank slightly. She had known this moment would come. Inside the office, several teachers were seated. Their tone was calm, careful. They thanked her for what she had done. They spoke of how the audience had responded, how parents were still talking about the performance, how the students had been inspired. She listened quietly, hands folded in her lap. Then they asked her questions. Where had she learned to play? Why had she stopped? Would she consider helping more often? Maybe teaching a few students? Maybe performing again? Each question felt heavier than the last. She answered slowly, choosing her words with care. She said she learned long ago. She said life had changed. She said music was personal to her, not something she wanted to turn into a public role again. The room was silent as they listened. One of the teachers apologized. Not loudly, not dramatically, but sincerely. They admitted they had judged her without knowing her story. That moment stayed with her. It mattered more than applause ever could. She thanked them and stood to leave. The rest of the day passed quietly, but she could feel the eyes on her again. Students whispered. A few smiled shyly. One student even said thank you as she passed by. She nodded politely and continued walking. At lunch, she chose her usual corner. For the first time, someone asked if they could sit with her. She hesitated, then agreed. The conversation was simple. About school. About music. Nothing deep. Nothing heavy. That was enough. In the days that followed, the attention slowly softened. The excitement faded into memory. She was no longer the mystery performer. She was simply someone who had played beautifully once. And that was exactly how she wanted it. One afternoon, while cleaning the music room, she noticed a young student standing near the door, watching the piano. The student looked nervous, uncertain. She recognized that look immediately. Without thinking too much, she asked if the student wanted to try playing. The student shook their head quickly, afraid of making mistakes. She smiled gently and said mistakes were part of learning. She sat beside the piano, not to perform, but to listen. The student played a few shaky notes. She nodded encouragingly. That small moment stayed with her long after the room was empty. She realized something then. Music did not have to mean pressure, stages, or expectations. It could exist quietly, passed from one person to another without demand. A few days later, she was offered a choice. She could continue her current work as it was, or she could take on a small, optional role, helping students who wanted extra practice. No announcements, no spotlight, just quiet guidance. She took time to think. At home that evening, she sat by the window again, watching the sky change colors. Her hands rested calmly now. No restless movements, no hidden tension. She thought about the years she had spent hiding, about the fear that had once controlled her choices, about the peace she had felt while playing, and the peace she had felt afterward. By morning, she had her answer. She agreed to help on her own terms. The arrangement was simple. She would guide, not perform, teach, not impress. Music would belong to the students, not to expectations. Life settled into a new rhythm. She worked as before, but now, once or twice a week, she sat at the piano with a student beside her. There was no pressure, just patience, just sound. She noticed changes in herself too. She smiled more easily. She slept better. The quiet no longer felt like hiding, felt like choice. One evening, as she locked the music room, she paused and placed her hand gently on the piano. She was no longer afraid of it. She walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, feeling balanced, grounded. She did not need recognition. She did not need titles. She had found a way to let music exist in her life without losing herself. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Time passed quietly the way she liked it. Weeks turned into months, and the school returned to its normal rhythm. The excitement from the program faded into memory, mentioned only occasionally in passing conversations. For most people, it became just another successful event. For her, it became a turning point she carried gently, without letting it define her. She continued her work each day, arriving early, leaving quietly. But now there was balance. On certain afternoons, she sat beside the piano with a student who wanted to learn. There was no pressure, no audience, just patience, small corrections, and encouragement given in soft words. She noticed how different teaching felt compared to performing. There was no need to impress, no fear of judgment. Watching a student slowly understand a simple melody brought a deeper kind of joy. Felt honest. One day, a student asked why she never played fully anymore. The question was innocent, curious, not demanding. She thought for a moment before answering. She said that music had many forms. Sometimes it was loud and shared. Sometimes it was quiet and private. Both were important. The student nodded, satisfied. That simple exchange stayed with her. Outside of school, her life remained modest. She still walked the same streets, shopped at the same small stores, cooked simple meals. But inside her, something had softened. The tight grip she once held on herself had loosened. She no longer feared being seen because she was no longer hiding. One evening, while walking home, she passed an open hall where music drifted into the street. A small gathering was taking place inside. Nothing formal, just people sharing songs and laughter. She paused outside, listening. For the first time in years, she did not feel the urge to turn away. She stood there for a while, letting the sound wash over her. When someone noticed her and invited her in, she hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. She did not play that night. She did not need to. Being present was enough. At the school, the teachers had changed too. They spoke more carefully, listened more closely. They had learned that talent does not always announce itself, and that respect should not depend on titles or roles. She noticed students becoming braver with their music. Fewer tears during practice. More smiles. Mistakes were treated as part of growth, not failure. In small ways, her quiet influence had spread. One afternoon, as the school year neared its end, the music teacher asked her a simple question. Would she like to play once more, just for the students? No audience, no parents. Just a moment to close the year. She thought about it, She thought about the fear that once controlled her, the silence she had built, the joy she had rediscovered. She agreed. The day came quietly, the music room filled with students sitting on the floor, relaxed and curious. No lights, no stage, just a piano and a shared space. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. This time she did not hold back. She played with warmth, honesty, and freedom. The music told a story without words. A story of loss, patience, and return. The students listened closely not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. When she finished, there was no applause. Just silence, deep and respectful. Then smiles. Then quiet thank yous. That was enough. On the last day of school, she walked through the halls one final time before the break. She locked the music room and stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the door. She did not feel sadness. She felt peace. As she stepped outside, sunlight warmed her face. Life stretched ahead, uncertain but open. She knew she would continue living simply. She knew music would always be part of her, whether heard or unheard. She had learned something important. Being a virtuoso did not mean standing in front of crowds or proving worth. It meant understanding when to speak and when to listen, when to step forward and when to remain still. She walked away from the school, not as someone hiding, and not as someone chasing attention, just as herself. And that finally was enough.